Hey guys, Krootman here, and we're going to continue our GPU review in 2024. In this series, we take a look at GPUs, new and used, old and new, AMD and NVIDIA. We don't discriminate, and we're going to leave no stone unturned in our quest to find the best GPU before the holidays for 1440p gaming. And in this episode of GPU reviews in 2024, we come to the RX 7700 XT, released in 2023 by AMD. Priced at almost $200 less than the 7900 GRE, and coming in at $130 less than the 7800 XT at the time of this filming. It was not really on my radar, if we're being honest, and I hardly know anything about this GPU, but a buddy of mine messaged me and asked me if I wanted to borrow it to check it out, and I said I'd love to, and here we are, off to the races. So I spent a few nights gaming with this GPU on my test bench in 1440p, and here's my review. Is it overpriced, or is it the best value AMD GPU out there for people who prefer new graphics cards? Or is it somewhere in between? Stay tuned and find out. We're going to quickly go over the specs of the 7700 XT. So the ones that really matter is it's 12 gigabits of GDDR6 VRAM at 192-bit memory bus and a TDP of 245 watts. The suggested PSU size is 550 watts, but you could probably be at 500 or even 450 if you're using a lower end CPU like a 60 watt PS or CPU, and you'll be just fine. And we're testing it on my standard 1440p test bench. The only thing you need to know is it has a 5800X 3D on it and 32 gigabits of GDDR4 RAM at CL16 3200 megahertz. And my monitor of choice is the Gigabit M27Q 27-inch 165Hz monitor. Finally, let's go over my testing methodology. There's two big things that I do differently than most other reviewers. The first one is I do not test with upscaling on, as if you spend this much on a graphics card, I believe you should play it natively as it was intended. And the second thing I do is I don't really show graphs. I do a mix of benchmarks and in-game footage, and then I talk about my experience, as I feel like that's more realistic for the average gamer. And that's what I try to portray on this channel. Alright, so first let's start off with the benchmarks. You can see my Steel Nomad score right here. My score was about 33.99. The average of systems with a 7700 XT and a 5800X 3D is 33.22, and the best is a 35.92. So I'll take that. That's, you want to be a little bit above the average and a little bit under the best. Now let's move on to TimeSpy. So my 3D Mark TimeSpy score was 15,606. The average score was 15,749, and the best was 17,696. My graphics score was 16,664. Now, obviously, these synthetic benchmarks don't really match up to in-game performance, but I wanted you to see the kind of GPU that I'm working with, and as you can see, it wasn't like a badly bin GPU, but it wasn't a insanely good GPU either, just an average one. Alright, so the first game I usually test is Call of Duty Modern Warfare. This covers my gauntlet of esports titles, because if you can play this game and run this game well, then you can play any other esports game on your PC with your graphics card. So we ran this at high presets and upscaling off, and you can see we got an average FPS of 127, and we got the low 1% at 93. So that's not bad at all, and it led to a pretty smooth gameplay experience. Now, the interesting thing to note about when I actually played this, I was hitting close to my FPS cap. I was getting between 135-ish to about 155 to 160-ish average, and this is a 165Hz monitor. But one thing I did notice was when I tried to up the settings from ultra to extreme presets, I got a lot of stuttering and a tiny bit of frame tearing, and it made for a kind of a jarring experience. But when you went back down to ultra, everything was great, which is really nice. And honestly, the difference between ultra and extreme, I didn't really notice it, minus the performance drop. But I've never really seen that before on higher end GPUs, so I thought that was kind of interesting and something that I wanted to note. So the next game I want to talk about is Horizon Forbidden West. I had to dial the settings down from very high just to high because I wanted to try to keep that constant 60 FPS. I was getting about, I want to say, between like 53 to 65-ish FPS. We're going to go with about 60 as the average, and the lows were probably like in the very low 50s. I ran around in the starting area where there's a lot of bushes and a lot of textures, and I did that for a little bit, and I didn't see any stuttering or notice any problems. Hitting 60 FPS in Horizon Forbidden West is where you want to be, and this GPU passed with flying colors. So we went to Helldivers 2 now. Now, obviously, we know this game isn't the best in terms of optimization, and it does use a good bit of CPU power. But at very high settings, which is what I always leave this game on for every GPU I test, we were getting about a constant 60 to 65 FPS, which is pretty impressive. Obviously, the GPU doesn't matter as much in this game. As long as you hit about between 60 and 80 FPS on Helldivers 2, your experience will be just fine. I played a full mission on difficulty 7, and I didn't have any issues with lag or stuttering or anything that would hurt gameplay. So this was a win for Helldivers 2. Now, I wanted to push the 7700 XT as hard as I could. So I put on Cyberpunk 2077, and I used my standard settings to gauge where the 7700 XT would fall with compared to a lot of other GPUs. So my standard settings are high settings with ray tracing on medium, DLSS and frame generation and FSR, etc. off. And I got it basically an unplayable 26.61 FPS, which was unsurprising when you consider a GPU like the 7900 GRE could barely do 30 FPS with ray tracing on medium. I expected nothing less. So essentially, this GPU is a dud when it comes to anything related to ray tracing, which is disappointing, especially considering its price point and that, NVIDIA GPUs like the 2080 Ti can handle these similar settings at a playable frame rate. But it is what it is, and we always knew that AMD is not as good as NVIDIA when it comes to ray tracing. And frankly, if you don't even care about ray tracing, which I actually do, but I know most people don't, then this shouldn't even matter to you. So if we take these same settings and we just toggle ray tracing off, you can see we get a very respectable 87.7 FPS, with the max at 103 and the low at 75. I ran around the town center of Night City, caused a bunch of chaos, and generally just tried to push the GPU as hard as I could, and I didn't notice any stuttering or lag, and it was a very nice experience in 1440p. And Cyberpunk is one of those games where you really notice the difference with upscaling on or off, and the 7700 XT did really well. Now let me show you what my FPS was in-game. In-game, I was getting a little over 100 FPS on average. Obviously, as you know, the in-game FPS is always a little bit better than running the benchmark. I would definitely recommend this game for the 7700 XT if you don't mind turning ray tracing off. But it was nice to know that you could take one of the most powerful games in our generation and watch the 7700 XT perform handily without upscaling technology, even if you had to turn ray tracing off. So one of the reasons that I like to re-review GPUs in 2024, even if they came out, say, within the last year or so, is because a lot can change. When the 7700 XT released, it was billed as a successor to the 6700 XT with the price point of the 6800 XT successor, aka its value proposition was terrible, instantly written off and forgotten about. And like I said, it's one of the few GPUs that I never use and I didn't really know much about because the value proposition made it a non-starter. Fast forward to September 2024, and at $350, this thing might be the value king for new GPUs under $400. With its only direct comparison from NVIDIA being the 4060 Ti, which, unless you guys live under a rock, you know that it's a pretty garbage GPU at that value, and you essentially need to get it at like $250 for it to not suck. Then on the AMD side, at the 7600 or the 7600 XT is the closest comparison. They're not worth it when you compare them to the 7700 XT. Now, if you want to go higher, you have to basically go to the 7800 XT or the 4070 from NVIDIA, and you're looking at between $160 to like $170 price difference there. At that price, you can essentially buy a brand new Intel i5 12600K. When you're trying to build a new PC, even if you're going for like something like 1440p where you're not exactly trying to cheap out, you still want to get the best value. If you can essentially get a 7700 XT and a 12600K for the price of, say, a 4070, then that's just a no-brainer in my book. So it's amazing the difference a year or two makes, because the 7700 XT is the value king in terms of buying brand new GPUs under $400. Now, obviously, if we go to the used market, this thing will easily get dethroned. But if you're watching this video, you probably want this thing new because you don't feel comfortable buying used GPUs, and that's fine. So, thank you again for watching this video. I hope it helped. And we'll be doing another review probably in a week or two. So make sure you like and you hit that sub button on this channel. Thanks again for watching. Krootman is out.